Hey everyone, and thanks for tuning in to part 5 of my Deploying OpenSense at Home video series. Today, we're going to be talking about backups, because it is going to be inevitable that in your home labbing journey, you're going to make a configuration change or one small tweak that's going to lead into losing access to your firewall or your media server or whatever it is. And having a backup is going to be invaluable, and that is no different for OpenSense. Now, OpenSense has a few different mechanisms available by which to take backups, and they each have their pros and cons, and the real solution is to use those backup mechanisms in conjunction with each other. So let's take a look at how those work. If we go to System, Configuration, Backups, the first option you'll see here is Backup Count. This is going to be the number of local backups kept cached on the OS disk. It's important to keep this number reasonable based on the amount of free space that you have on the OS drive, and still not let that get filled up, because if that OS drive gets full, you're going to have a bad time. We're going to get back to where those are stored and how to get access to those in just a little bit, but the first thing I want to show off is how do you just quickly grab a backup configuration file and restore it. So you'll notice here under the download option, you have the option to download configuration. If we click on that, we'll get a download prompt. And as you can see here, I've actually already downloaded a copy of this config from earlier, but we can go ahead and save this one again. Some browsers are going to mark this as an insecure download and ask you to click on keep or delete. We're going to click on keep. And if we wanted to restore that, we can click choose file, choose that configuration file from our downloads folder, and we can choose what areas we want to restore. Now, I've had pretty good luck restoring individual areas of the firewall, and that means individual configurations of any given service, rather than restoring the whole configuration file. However, the OpenSense documentation does indicate that this is not recommended and may actually be removed in future versions. So if you don't see that option in the version that you're running, don't be too surprised. It sounds like they were having some problems with that feature. So once you have selected that configuration file, selected that we want to reboot that VM and flush the cache, we're going to go ahead and click restore. We'll get a confirmation here at the top of the page that the firewall is going to reboot. And with the power of editing, we will be back at the login screen. All right, once we're back at the login screen, we'll go ahead and log back in. And we'll navigate back to that backups folder. So you'll see here, my backup count actually changed to 7. And that's because the backup that I restored to is from before I changed that value to 10. Okay, so where are these backups? You'll notice here in the UI, we actually don't have a mechanism to see those backups. We can go to the configuration history and see the changes that were actually made and undo them manually. But as far as where these files are, we can't see them from here in the GUI. We have to access the console. So here's the console for my firewall. This would be the same for you if you were to plug a video cable into your firewall directly, much like when you were installing it. So if we sign in here, you'll notice we have an option number 13 there. And if we enter 13, we'll get the option of select what backup to restore. But in this case, you'll notice that we actually don't have any on the system currently. We're going to leave that blank. We're going to go back to the GUI here. And we're going to make a configuration change. And we're actually going to make another configuration change. So we made one configuration change, changing the backup count to 10, and one changing it to 12. Now, if we go back to that console again, do option 13, you'll see that we have two backups. The first backup, the older one, is going to be the configuration change before we made any changes. So that's going to be 7 backups. The second one is going to be the first change we made, taking us back to 10. But you'll notice there's no backup option given to us here for our current configuration of 12 backups. Now, that backup does exist because every time we make a configuration change, a backup will be made. But this restore from a backup option will only give us the ability to restore from backups that aren't the way that our system is currently configured. So the current option will never be given. So what do I mean by that? Well, if we go into the shell, option 8, and we navigate to the conf folder, and we list the contents of the conf folder, you can see we have a directory called backup and a file called config.xml. So config.xml is actually the running configuration file. And if we enter the backup folder and list the contents, there are those 3 backup files that I was referring to. The most recent one being the 12, the second oldest one being the 10, and the oldest one being the 7. So you could download the files from here. You could plug in a USB drive, copy the files off, and use that as a way to store them off of the system in the case of like a drive failure or a hardware failure. But there's got to be a better way. And luckily there is, and we're going to dive into that next. So if we go to firmware, plugins, and show community plugins, and do a search for backups, you'll see there's an option here called Google Drive Backup. Let's go ahead and install that plugin. And then refresh the page and go back to configuration and backups. You'll see we have a new section here called Google Drive. Now this section has some steps to set it up, and we're going to go through those. However, I do want to highlight that those steps have changed over the years. And so I'm also going to link the steps to the Opnsense documentation for configuring Google Drive backups in the description below. If something you're seeing doesn't match the steps that I go through today, check the documentation to see if that process has changed. That will always be the most up-to-date way to do this sort of a configuration. Now, it's worth noting the way Google Drive backups work is a little different than the local backups. So I believe it's worth having both. The local backups take a backup every time you make a configuration change. And that change will be stored as a backup after the change is applied. Google Drive backups happen once every 24 hours, and they only create a backup if they detect that a change has been made. So if your configuration doesn't change for 2 or 3 days, it's not going to take an additional backup. Well, let's go ahead and go through the process of getting this Google Drive set up. So you're going to need to go to the Google Developer Console and get signed in. And once you're signed in, you should be looking at a page like this, where you have the option to create a project in the top left corner. So we're going to go ahead and create a project, and we're just going to call this Opnsense Backups. Then if we refresh the page, we should see that that project has been made. Now on the left-hand side, we're going to go to APIs and Services, and in the top left here, we should make sure that this is the name of our project that we're working with. If you've never created a Google Developer Console project before, it should be selected by default. Go ahead and click Enable APIs and Services. And we're going to look for the Google Drive API. And we're going to enable it. Once that's enabled, we're going to do a search for service accounts. And we're going to create a new service account. Give it a brief description and a name that's obviously easy to recognize. Go ahead and click Create and Continue. And we actually don't need to provide any other details here. We just click Done. Now, if nothing shows up here, just go ahead and click the refresh. All right, and what we should see here is a big long email address that's going to be associated with this service account that we have created. Take note of that email address because we will need it for later. Next, we're going to need to create a key as a private key that this will use to authenticate to the storage account. So we're going to click on Actions, Manage Keys. We're going to add a key and create a new key. The format we're going to choose is P12. Do not create a JSON. It's going to give you an option to save this key. You do need to save this as we will have to upload it to the firewall. It's also important to keep this very secure. This is going to have access to a folder in your Google Drive. You do not want someone getting access to that. And we can click close on this menu here. And now if we refresh, we should see that the key has been applied. Now let's go out to our Google Drive account. And let's create a folder where we're going to put these files. We don't just want to put them in the root. That way we can actually limit the access of the service account to a specific folder. So we can click on the name of the folder, click on Share, and we can actually copy that email from that service account, paste that in as an editor, and click Save. Now that account should have access to just this folder within our account. The other thing we'll want to note, since we're doing a limited folder, is we actually need to copy this folder ID, which is everything after the /folders of the URL, because we'll need that to put into OpnSense. So now if we go back to OpnSense, we can enable Google Drive, we can paste in that email address, select that P12 key, enter the folder ID, and now we have a couple more options here. Prefix hostname to backup file. We'll apply the hostname, in this case OpnSense, to the name of the file in the Google Drive folder. This isn't strictly necessary, but it is very helpful if you're backing up multiple systems to a single folder, as it can help distinct which system belongs to which file. I'm going to go ahead and enable it for this example. The second is backup count. You'll notice this has a much more aggressive backup count. That's because these files are actually fairly small, and even with a free tier Google Drive account, you've got like 15 gigabytes to work with. Again, you can decrease this if you need to. I'm just going to leave it as the default. Now, you do not need to input a password here, although generally a good idea with any sort of cloud storage. This is going to apply a password and encrypt the file as it's stored in your Google Drive account. I'm not going to do it for this example, but know that you can, but you will need that password when you go to restore the file. So let's click Setup and Test. And if that was successful, we'll get a confirmation of the file that was created. And if we go back over to our Google Drive account, we can see the file is there. And you see how it has the whole domain name of my firewall, in this case, opensense.mydomain.com, applied to the beginning. If I didn't have that checkbox selected, you would just get this string of characters. So this makes it quite a bit more readable as far as knowing what backup this is, what firewall it belongs to. If you need backups more often than daily, again, you can always come in here and download these manually. But another option I've found is you can actually go to Settings, Cron, which is like a scheduler, and you can click Add, and one of the options in here is Remote Backup. So this will allow you to create a schedule for how often backups happen. So for example, if you want to run backups every day at noon in addition to the daily backup, you would put in, the 12th hour of every day. Or if you wanted to run a backup every 12 hours, you could do something like that. There's all kinds of tools online to help you write a cron job. What I did for an example was just set this to every minute. All right, and with that example of every minute, you can see now we see an additional backup in the Google Drive. And if we wait another minute, another one will appear. A downside to this cron job workaround is this does not run the check to see if the configuration has changed. So by default, enabling the Google Drive backup will do the backup once per day if the configuration has changed. The cron method is as frequently as you want to run the backups, but does not do a check to see if the configuration has changed. I'm going to go ahead and delete this job now. So there you go. Those are some simple methods for how to set up and use backups within OpnSense. Just to kind of recap, you can set a local backup count that sets a local cache of files that are stored locally on the system that you can access from the serial console and restore backups from there. You can download the configurations locally here as frequently as you want, or you can configure the Google Drive community plugin to automatically do daily backups, or as frequently as you want backups, out to a Google Drive account. Hopefully you found this helpful. Hopefully you make some good habits here in backing up your systems and do some practice restores. That's a big part of this too. You can't just assume that you have good backups. Do system restore tests periodically. Make sure that you're familiar with your process, that you remember your encryption password if you set one, so on and so forth. Until next time, thanks for watching.